Hi, this is Maria,
And this is Sheila,
and we want to welcome you to The Moms I Know.
Homeschool Edition.
We're so excited to bring this series of episodes focused on homeschooling. We're going to talk to you about what homeschooling is, whether this is right for your family, how to do it, and lots more.
So stay tuned.
Receive the children in reverence, educate them in love, and send them forth in freedom. Rudolph Steiner. Today we're going to be talking about philosophies in homeschooling and in education, and how to come to an understanding within your family of how you want to homeschool. So before we get into the real discussion of philosophy and resources, we just want to go over some practical information about the legality of homeschooling. We want to recommend that you really check out your own state as to how homeschooling is legally done there. But we can tell you a little bit about in California what the legalities are. This is important information.
Yeah, and to know that homeschooling is legal in all 50 states in our country, but it's not legal in every country. You know, it is definitely, I know there's definitely some few countries in Europe where it is not. So if you are choosing to homeschool, you have to make a decision of how you want to be, kind of how you want to be seen. There's the PSA, which is a private school affidavit. And the easiest way to do that is to really just Google it, PSA, and you will be able to send your form to Sacramento and get that done. There's also the charter school way, which is, again, Maria and I were consistently saying to ask your neighbors, ask your community, see what you see, who are the homeschoolers? And that would be, are they in a charter school? Are they doing an independent studies program attached to a school in a school district? There's also online programs. That's what I work for. I work for an online charter school where you do get funds. So there are many options there. You can homeschool without any money, and then there are ways where you do get funds for homeschooling. And when you do that, though, you are making a choice to do state testing. It's kind of if you want to pay to play, you have to do the state testing.
So there's also religious affiliations. There's, lots of different ways that you can legally homeschool within your communities. And so, we just wanted you to have that background knowledge. There are in some cases, there's hourly requirements per day. So you want to be aware of those. You want to be aware of your state standards. But at this point, we're really going to just launch into a bigger discussion of sort of the philosophy.
I think that is probably one of the more difficult conversations, because do you go ahead and invest hundreds of dollars in a curriculum that you don't know how it's going to work, and will your child learn this way, or will your child like this way? So that's why it is really important that when you start this homeschool journey, that you really talk to other homeschoolers, and number one, see what they are using. And Maria and I will go through a variety of different educational philosophies in this episode, but it's really important by this time, by this fourth episode, if we hope you've listened to the first three, that you have decided you're going to homeschool. You have that knowledge and that that conviction, which you need to homeschool, to go against the grain, that you're going to homeschool. And now it's the part of looking at your family values, and then this really good question of how does your individual child learn? Even children in the same family can learn differently. So do you have any tips, Maria, on how we can look at how different children learn?
Right. One of my favorite resources is Howard Gardner's Multiple Intelligences. And I think when I discovered this, we were struggling along. We pulled our son out of public school and we decided we were going to homeschool, but we really didn't know how we were going to do this. And I think this is the quintessential question of homeschooling is, how do we do this? And so I know both you and I struggled along the way of trying to find our rhythm and find our curriculum and decide what our philosophy really was. And then also looking at our individual children, because yes, all of them do learn so differently. And we know that, our listeners, whether you have one child or three or more, they're all going to be their own unique individual. And there's another book called A Mind at a Time that I really enjoyed by Mel Levine. And, looking at every single brain is unique. So we have to create something that is going to work for every individual. And as we were struggling with this, I came across these multiple intelligences and really looking at, whether the child is kinesthetic or logical mathematical or verbal linguistic, or, to the different types of learners. And so we really want to look at who they are, how they're going to learn best, how we can bring things to them. And so that helps us to develop our own educational philosophy. And along the way, we looked at quite a few philosophies out there. And then as I became a homeschool mentor and I was working with other families, that was always the big question, is like, well, how do I do this? And how do I know how my child learns best? And so trying to coach people along the way, instead of just saying, well, you could do it this way, or this is how we did it, because it's going to be unique for each child. So, we're here to help you look at these choices and to look at the different philosophies and say, how are we going to bring this education to our children? How are we going to facilitate that? I mean, some of our favorite quotes are about, we're not really imparting wisdom to them. We're helping to inspire them to learn for themselves.
Yeah, we're guides in a way. We're showing them and we follow their lead. So you talked about visual, kinesthetic, logical types of learning. There's also auditory types of learning. Mm-hmm. And it's important that as a parent, hopefully you're tuned into your child, but if you have no idea, well, that's okay too. If you don't see, and we're saying that these different intelligence, because sometimes, and I'll give my son as an own example, is that I knew in kindergarten, he was not ready yet to read. We were reading to him every day since the day he was born. So we knew that was important. However, he did not have the desire to do that. What did he do have the desire to do? He had the desire to play soccer, to jump on a trampoline, he was very strong in his physical body. So we knew part of his learning was going to be kinesthetic, whether it was, I'm clapping my hands right here, but like clapping, learning multiples, number multiples, etc. And so if you are unsure of how your child learns, it's a time to ask, caregivers, grandparents, teachers, if they have chosen to do preschool, just to give you an idea of how your child learns.
Yeah, there's a lot of resources out there that are available. And I think, when we educate ourselves, and then we can start getting these cues too. I mean, both of my children are pretty auditory learners, late readers as well. And when they hear something, it becomes their own. But if they had to read it, it didn't always stick. One more kinesthetic than the other. And, with the hundreds of children that I've worked with, I've seen these different strengths, now. We have the outdoor learner, we have, it's exciting to see and to look at them individually and say, okay, who are they? And how can I then inspire, and how can we learn together? And my learning style actually is very, very different than my two children. And so it was really fun to have to learn more on my own before I could really get them going.
And that's the beauty of homeschooling, right? As a homeschool parent, is learning, something more, but learning alongside your children. I mean, so many of my rich learning experiences happened while I was teaching my children. So I love that. So should we go into the different educational philosophies?
Yeah, and I can start with, with my own journey again was, we were kind of figuring this out. I knew that we needed to take a little break from really school-like, I say deschooling, but, basically we had to kind of have a time of relaxation because that first grade month had been a little challenging. And so we started just doing projects and going on outings and reading lots of stories and just relaxing for a while. But that, this is when he was 6.
And I want to tap into that deschooling just to kind of explain, because I've had a few students, a few families contact me just recently, and we usually hear deschooling in the fall months when children start back at school at any level. One of these children was a high schooler, another one was in 8th grade, just not feeling it, not really not doing well, and so they want to pull them out. And at those later ages, remember, these are children that have been maybe stuck in a system that's not serving them. So the parent finally says, you know what, that's it, I'm pulling them out because we're going to homeschool. And what you have to do is go through the process of deschooling so that, like Maria said, they they can learn to learn again, because up until this point, learning has been painful for them. Learning has been something that has caused them stress, anxiety, and it's really left a bad flavor in their mouth. By deschooling them, you are telling them that it's okay. Let's give space. Like we said earlier, like in the Moms I Know, space and grace. We have to give that to our children as well. And don't worry, they are going to be fine. They will catch up. Okay, they will catch up. But I think deschooling is a really important kind of word to know in the homeschooling,
Right, because within the educational system, if they've been in a system, some kids thrive in that, and many don't. And so, because that's a system where learning is sort of imposed upon them. And what we're trying to talk about is this learning coming from within. And so when the children can relax, when they realize that this education is their own, then they can be learning for learning's sake, and learning because they want to learn, not because somebody else has been telling them, this is what we think you should learn. And so, as parents, we can be those guides. We can say, well, we think these things are important within our family. And so within our own family, literature is very, very important. So we were able to read to our children from the time that they were very young, all the way through, I think, middle school pretty much. And those were things that we were choosing. And so we went through a lot of classical literature. We went through a lot of really rich language, poetry, all types of things. But because that was our value. And then the children had their own things that they loved the literature. They loved hearing stories, but they also had other interests. And so along the way, when we were kind of, looking for what is our family philosophy of education, we came upon Waldorf education. And for me, that really clicked in terms of the pedagogy. And so Waldorf education is really based on, a more holistic model of body, mind, and spirit, very hands-on. In the early ages, children are really learning through doing, and a lot of handwork, sewing, singing, literature, stories, artwork. And so that really resonated with me. It resonated with my children. And so we tried to learn as much as we could. Well, I tried to learn as much as I could about Waldorf education, and then brought those things to my children. And that really resonated with them in those early years. And then as they got older and really needed to be in a school situation again, that's where we went. Similar with Montessori education, also very hands-on, both Waldorf and Montessori, really creating beauty for the children. Everything is, lots of beautiful handmade items and things that are really worthy of the children working with. And within Montessori, lots of child-led learning projects and, play as work. And so Waldorf education is based on the teachings of Rudolph Steiner. Montessori is based on the teachings of Maria Montessori, both, very brilliant educators looking at how children learn. And so both of those, I think there are schools all over the world now, Waldorf schools and Montessori schools. And if you want to homeschool your children within those philosophies, there's a lot of resources out there that are available to you.
Yeah, and a lot of when we're saying resources, so what we're talking about, I want to break this down, and we do break this down in our homeschool handbook, but that we have educational philosophies. And so we have these, basically these leaders, Rudolph Steiner, like you said, Maria Montessori, we're going to talk about Thomas Jefferson, classical education in a second, but that these philosophies of education basically are, how do children learn? So they're saying, children learn through doing, children learn through beauty, children learn, etc. And so then the next step is, once you have philosophy, is really looking for the curriculum, the resources. How do you practice Waldorf? How do you practice Montessori? And so when you hear Montessori, immediately you think of manipulatives. I think of, they have actual, Montessori curriculum pieces that you can buy at each grade level. So it is so doable, and there are so many resources online, offline. And again, that's why you talk to your community and you see what resources you can come to get up with together as a community. So you talked about Montessori and Waldorf, and I want to talk a little bit about Charlotte Mason. Charlotte Mason is her teaching method consists of activities and attitudes that helps a child learn self-discipline as well as academic subjects. And the best way for me to think about Charlotte Mason is that she's kind of the lifestyle. Her motto was education is an atmosphere, a discipline, a life. So really educating the whole child, not just the mind. And one of my favorite pieces of a curriculum that uses Charlotte Mason is actually Brave Writer. And it is a lifestyle. There's such a thing as a Brave Writer lifestyle. And you will find more about this, of course, in the handbook, but I just want to give you an example. Another educational philosophy that we talk about is what's called a classical education, also known sometimes as Thomas Jefferson. And that is education that, as it sounds, classical it's broken into three different kind of learning time periods. You start out with the foundational, where grammar is really, really important. And then it goes into a dialectic, logic, and like kind of the middle school, upper elementary, middle school. And then it goes into the rhetoric, which is really the synthesis of knowledge. And there are many types of curriculum that support that, but one of the probably really well-known one is A Well-Trained Mind by Susan Wise Bauer. So she's kind of an expert on classical education. So in addition to the four we've mentioned, we still have some more, but is religious homeschool. And that can be the religion of your choice, but that those values are going to align very deeply with your family and with your homeschool. So you can, figure out how you're going to teach certain subjects in relation to your religion.
So when I was working with families at our homeschool program, a lot of families would come to homeschooling for different reasons. Some were coming because they wanted to bring more of that, those religious values to their families. Other ones wanted to have much more choice over the kinds of curriculum that they were bringing to their children. So, and it's interesting. So we've talked a little bit about Waldorf Montessori, Charlotte Mason, classical education. We talk a little bit about unschooling and wild schooling and family schooling. So I'd love for you to differentiate those a little bit.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about unschooling kind of as this umbrella. Unschooling is a term that has been given loosely to families that don't adhere to a specific educational philosophy / curriculum. Now, here's the kind of the caveat is that unschooling can be really successful when done by well-intentioned parents, okay? Because unschooling can also be that lifestyle. Sometimes Charlotte Mason, that lifestyle can be seen as unschooling in some places. Unschooling is that you are going to follow your children sometimes. It's sometimes led by the children. It's called project-based learning. It's travel schooling. It's schooling on the road. There is a new contingent, but a new kind of brand of homeschooling called road schooling, where people are redoing these old schoolie buses and traveling across the country, educating their children in coffee shops and on their bus, and they're, reading and learning geography and visiting national parks. That's education, right?
I love that. A new kind of road scholar.
Right, exactly. Exactly. Wild schooling is where the emphasis of the education is done outdoors. You're learning, very environmentally based, very much nature based, and you can do that. Part about unschooling is really across the curriculum you can learn. And just for example, let's take wild schooling, Maria. We're really good at this. So what could you do math for wild schooling? You start by counting, right? For example, counting the acorns, counting the leaves. You can see design patterns. If you were wild schooling, what would be some examples of language arts?
Well, you're out there tromping around the woods, you're discussing things, you're looking at the different weather patterns, you're talking all of the time. Then of course you can bring in the stories around the outdoor campfire. And so, especially with very young children, really looking at storytelling as the precursor of reading. And so we really want to be language rich. And that's also the grammar aspect of the classical education. So
and then bringing that further, when the kids get a little older, journal writing. You know, I know when we went, we did a 3-week road trip to Yellowstone, we gave the kids travel journals. So they had to illustrate a picture of where we were, and then they'd have to write a commentary. You know, they can do that on a blog, but that's part of wild schooling, where obviously the science is obvious. And then so we did math, science, language, arts, social studies. Is where are you wild schooling? You know, what is the context? And like you said, the weather can fall into that as well.
And you're going to see, you know, we're drawing all of these connections too, which is something that just comes up as you homeschool. And so, you know, you were talking about the journaling. In Waldorf education, the children create their own books. And so, you know, instead of there being as many textbooks that are being sort of, you know, read, we're creating from storytelling, and then the children are writing their own. And so, you know, we're showing that there's themes that run through all of these philosophies, and then the curriculum is how you bring this to life for your child, which kind of leads us to this family schooling, this phrase that, you know, that basically Sheila, you know, was talking about family schooling one day, and we said, really, that is what we do, and we're living and learning together as families. And we could look at that also as eclectic homeschooling, but we're picking from these different philosophies, and we're choosing how this resonates for our own children. And so family schooling really can encompass different types of philosophies and different kinds of curriculum. And for some times that, you know, when we were educating our children, there were times that we were on the road and we were taking these extensive trips, as was your family. And we were learning all about the geography, the cultures, the literature of the time or the area. And then there were other times when we were at home for longer periods of time. And so, you know, we were doing more of the Waldorf types of activities. And then there were times that we were studying abroad and doing things completely differently. So really what's so exciting about this, and it leads us back to that quote, is, you know, educating in freedom, you know, bringing forth the child, the individual child, who they are meant to be, and helping them to create this lifelong learning. And so, you know, when people would get frustrated with me going, well, wait a minute, you're not telling me how exactly to do this. I'm saying, well, that's the joy of this journey, is that we can learn together. We can make mistakes along the way, and yet they're not really mistakes. They're just, okay, that philosophy, maybe I want to think about this a little bit differently, or maybe that curriculum didn't quite work. There was another curriculum that we used along the way, that Beautiful Feet, with these wonderful maps and projects and stories and art that came together. And so and at a certain point in my child's education, that was perfect for them. So we really have to get creative.
And I want to, so now I think, so those are pretty much the main educational philosophies. There's some other ones out there, but we're just talking about the main ones, and we break them down in our homeschool handbook.
So really this is this idea, you know, and as we are coming to terms with our philosophies, we can also be bringing in other people as resources and networking with other families. And so there were families that would create curriculum together, and one parent who was particularly strong in an area would bring that, and another one could do this. And, you know, when my children were young, I had them work with a man who did outdoor survival skills. And then as the kids get older, especially those middle school years, they need other mentors. And so we can be doing different classes and different hobbies and clubs and things like that as well.
Yeah, I think for the well-rounded homeschooler, it's important to have other teachers besides the parent. I knew for me, I was not going to be my children's only teacher. You know, I used to be a high school history teacher, and one of my favorite lessons was telling my students, you be aware of your filters. If they only hear from me, you know, this is one point of view. They need to hear to make an objective, you know, opinion. They need to hear other points of view. And so that's how we use our community. That's how we learn about what other people do for other people, for their jobs. And it's how you support community as well, which is, I think, is a very important piece of homeschooling.
And my background was history and literature. And so that was an area that I was very, very comfortable with. Mathematics was not a particularly strong suit for me. But in the early years, we had lots of fun with games and manipulatives and hands-on activities and cooking. And so, you know, I did great up till about 4th, 5th, 6th, you know, grade. I could hold my own. And at a certain point, I didn't have the passion for it that I wanted my children to have. And so we found somebody who was just passionate about mathematics. and they were able to work with the children in really creative and fun ways, and the kids loved it. Similarly with foreign language, I don't speak a foreign language. Both my children now are fluent. They're completely bilingual in Spanish and English, and I hired somebody who could work with them, and they learned Spanish, and then they also learned it in school, and then they went on to study abroad in Mexico and Spain. And so, we can inspire them. We don't have to be their teacher for everything, like you said.
Yeah, and I really like you brought the word passion, and you need to have a passion for homeschooling. You need to have a passion for doing what you're doing, because if you don't, then you are not helping your children, and I'm sorry if that's but that's the reality of it. I knew when my passion left, I homeschooled my children for 10 years and I wasn't feeling it as much. And I knew it was time to put that aside for the moment. I might go back to it. I totally might go back to it. But homeschooling is constant. You are constantly trying to, inspire and really providing learning opportunities for your children. It is a job.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because, we are presenting this idealized picture of homeschooling, and it isn't always perfect and it isn't always easy, but it is joyful, and it can be an incredibly inspiring journey for the whole family. But it isn't for everyone, and so I'm glad you brought that up. And it's that awareness of when we have to look at those pieces as well. Although there were many families that I worked with along the way that were struggling, and so as a homeschool mentor, I was able to help ask questions and say, well, what about this? And what about that? And what if you tweak this? And how about bringing in somebody for this? And so, as we work together in community, we can also keep that passion going, or keep those, fires of inspiration lit.
And that's Maria. That's seriously what you just did right there, is the twist. And that's where, for those of you, I think we've already mentioned this, but Maria was my children's homeschool teacher. We would meet every month, and I would come in sometimes and I'd be like, oh my gosh, Maria, I am done. I can't do this. And she would always say, no, you are doing this. Look at what you are doing. And so I use that same, how you did that to me, I do that with my families that I now mentor. And it's not easy, but there's a woman I follow in the business world, and her name is Marie Forleo. Everything is figure outable. And I say that to my children. I say that to my homeschool families. If you want to do this, you can do this. Where I'm not trying to say that you can't do this, but you have to have a support system, and you have to want it, and so Maria, I love how you twist, you were able to do that again, because the glass is half full,
well, and that's why we're here. That's why we're creating this homeschool handbook. That's why we're creating this series of podcasts about this, because we do feel passionate about homeschooling when it is done well, when it is done with intention. And when we are looking at the children and saying, what do they need right now? And some children need to be homeschooled in those early years, and they're not ready for an institutionalized version of education. Some kids need to be pulled out at different places because they're having challenges. And you as the parent are always going to know your child the best and know what decisions to make. And also along the way, sometimes we second guess ourselves, and we need that support of other people. And then even when we choose to do this, sometimes there's people that are, as we talked about in the objections episode, people are going to question your choices. And so again, it's nice to have that support system to say, yes, you can do this, and we're with you. And so that's why we're here.
Yeah. So, this episode was talk about the educational philosophies, give you some ideas about curriculum. And it is a constant search for curriculum, in the sense that, Pinterest is such a great resource. But, in our homeschool handbook, we have a whole page of curriculum ideas and resources and that are tied to different philosophies. We have online resources. We have, actual hard, textbook resources. And it's just, it's part of the fun. We also, you're going to hear us say, ask somebody who is homeschooling, ask somebody how they do this. We do also have a list of questions that you can ask those people who are homeschooling, so that you have more information.
And on our next episode, we'll be going into a little bit about rhythm and creating, kind of a plan for your family, for your days, your weeks, your months, even the year type of a thing. But for now, I think it's really nice for you to be thinking about these philosophies, thinking about your own values, the things that your child is wanting to learn, the way they learn. And I think we can leave you with this today. We'll look forward to talking with you next time.
All right. Bye.
Take care. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you enjoyed this episode and got a lot out of it.
And if you want to learn more about homeschooling, we are super excited to share our new homeschool handbook, talking about the basics of homeschool, how to set up your homeschool, and even our real life stories of our own homeschool experiences.
So you can check that out at www.themomsiknow.com. And we look forward to hearing more from you and getting your insights and questions.
And if you can, we want you to share this. We want you to share about the homeschool handbook and share about the Moms I Know. And if you can, rate us on iTunes. We would be so appreciative. Thank you. We are so grateful for our listeners like you.
Take care.
Bye-bye.